First, I want to say that I am a huge fan of Lada Niva, and there are a couple of reasons for that. First is that Niva is the perfect countryside car, and similarly with the original Fiat Panda 4x4 is a car that I definitely want to own one day. But the number one reason is that I love Soviet and communist cars. And the reason for that is that the engineers, the designers, the people that were developing and building these cars were basically working with what would have been considered pocket money by the Western companies. And just the fact that these guys managed to build cars in such extreme poverty is impressive to me. So hello guys and welcome back to another video, and here is the story of Lada Niva. Despite being a big country with most of the people living on the rural parts, some interesting cars came from Russia since the early days of automobile industry. But after the socialists came into power in 1917, everything would change. Some of those few car companies that were operating at the time were closed, while the others, like Russobalt, were nationalized. Through the 20s, a number of new models were presented, including here the first Soviet car. But a big change came in 1920, when Nizhnegorodny Avtomobilny Zavod was founded. The company later was renamed Gorovsky Avtomobilny Zavod, or GAZ, how the car is commonly known. GAZ was a joint venture between Ford and the Soviets, when the Union would buy a number of cars and parts from Ford, while the American brand would support them with the necessary knowledge on how to build the cars. The first GAZ was a reverse Model A, a tactic that many Soviet cars would follow in the future. Also in 1929, the Soviet Union founded the second car company, the Moscovich. Most of these Soviet brands carried the name of the town where the car was built. The car production was growing rapidly and peaked at 200,000 cars in 1938, but with the beginning of the Second World War started to fall, since the manpower was put toward the war front. After the war ended, USSR started applying new policies in order to revitalize its auto industry, and by 1950 500,000 cars were being built in USSR. Also in 1950, Soviet Union started exporting cars in other countries, mostly in other socialist communist countries, including here Albania. Until 1991, most of the cars here in Albania were Soviet cars, and a good number of them were pre-1960s. And all of these cars were owned by the government, since people weren't allowed to own a car. The most you could own was a motorcycle, and this only if you had connection. Anyway, back to the story. The production of cars continued to grow, and GAZ and ZAZ and Moscovich were offering a wide range of cars. But in the late 60s, in order to reduce the cost of development and production, they decided to sign a license agreement and to build cars based on existing designs under the Soviet brand names. Some of the proposed brands were Renault, Peugeot, Volkswagen, Ford and Fiat. The Italians were the winners, and the Fiat 124 was a chosen car. Now the car went major upgrades in order to survive the tough roads of Russia, like a new engine, aluminium brake drums for the rear wheels, and probably the most famous one, the body panels, which were made out of thicker steel.
Amazingly tough.
The car was going to be built on a new factory in Toloyati. And with a new factory, a new brand was created, Volozhsky Avtomobilny Zavod, which translated to Volga Automobile Plant, since the factory was near the Volga River. Lada was created in the early 70s, and was basically the same thing with VAZ, only this time for the foreign market. Originally, the cars were sold under the name Ziguli, like in the Union, but the Ziguli name was found to be too hard to pronounce by the foreigners, so the name Lada was chosen. Since they were the same thing, Ladas and Vaz were built on the same factory. Something to keep in mind is that each factory in the Soviet Union acted like a brand, with engineers and designers. The story of Niva began in 1970, when chairman of the Council of the Minister Alexei Kosygin gave Vaz, Moscovich and Ij the task to build a car for the rural parts of USSR, mostly for farmers. Differently from most of the previous cars, the Niva was going to be built completely by the Soviets, so no licensing here. The Niva was going to be quite a revolutionary car, since the only cars with off-road capabilities were cars like the Moscovich 410, basically normal bodies mounted on four-wheel drive chassis. The first to present a prototype was Moscovich, with a 2148-2150. The car was an evolution of a prototype which Moscovich had built in the late 50s, but Moscovich's proposal was cancelled early on. Ij was a second, and their proposal was the Ij 14, presented in 1972. The car looked more promising than the Moscovich, since it looked better designed and engineered. But nevertheless, the project did not receive the green light from the government. Also in 1972, Vaz presented their proposal, the E2121. The car was built just for off-road testing, so the body was just some flat panels mounted on top of the four-wheel drive chassis. In fact, the project was so secret that the car didn't carry any Vaz badges, and the rumor was spread that the car was a Fiat that was being tested in Russia. The car started looking like the Niva that we know today only in 1973, when the design of Valery Semushkih was completed. The design was quite simple, a two-box design, more on the lines of a hatchback, similarly with a Fiat 127. So in a sort of way making the Niva one of the first crossovers, but this actually could climb everything. All this thanks to the lightweight body combined with a ground clearance, the permanent four-wheel drive system, the independent suspension and the central differential lock. The Vaz team did a lot of tests with the car in some of the most rural places of USSR, like Siberia, Ural Mountains, and parts of Tajikistan and Kazakhstan. And the car was also put against other cars like the Vaz 469, which was used by the Soviet army. But the interesting thing is that the car was also put against foreign cars like Jeeps, Land Rovers and Range Rovers. And the car actually managed to win against them, especially in the cold parts of the Union. This mainly due to the engine, which was a 1.5-liter engine, the same one found on the Vaz 2103. In 1975, the prototype received some minor design upgrades, like a new grille which also housed the headlights now, chrome front and rear bumper, and the four circle rear lights were replaced by the same rear lights found on the Vaz 2103. The car was planned to enter production in 1975, but the bureaucracies of the time delayed the project. Meanwhile, Vaz continued to work with the car, and the 1.5-liter engine was replaced by a 1.6-liter one, which was introduced in 1975 with the Vaz 2103. Finally, the Vaz 2121, how the car was called in USSR, entered production in 1977. The car was priced at 9,000 rubles, so not the cheapest thing for the average Soviet farmer, but very cheap for the foreign buyer. Niva was presented at the 1978 Paris Motor Show, and the car quickly became a hit. And this was expected, since at the time no other car could offer you what Niva could. So guys, thank you for watching, see you next time.